It's September 18th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Jongun. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with President Yoon Sukhyun's second appearance at the UN General Assembly. The South Korean leader is heading out to New York today to attend the 78th session. He'll push for Busan's World Expo bid and call for stronger international solidarity against North Korea-Russia military ties. And North Korea's Kim Jongun is on his way back home after a 6-day visit to Russia. We take a closer look at what Pyongyang and Moscow managed to get out of the trip. South Korea's Kayatumuli has been named on the UNESCO World Heritage List. There are burial mounds built by the Gaya kingdom between the 1st and 6th centuries. President Yoon Sukhyun begins his week-long trip to New York City for the UN General Assembly. Ahead of his departure, Yoon again highlighted serious security issues, including North Korea's nuclear program and possible arms collaboration with Russia. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
President Yoon Sukhyun reissued this warning against North Korea and Russia's potential arms cooperation, saying the international community will unite even more tightly against the move. The South Korean leader's remarks were published in an interview with the Associated Press ahead of his visit to New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly. Yoon said that military cooperation between Pyongyang and the Kremlin is illegal and unjust, as it contravenes UN Security Council resolutions and various global sanctions. This came amid concerns that North Korean leader Kim Jongun's summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin last week could lead to a weapons deal between the two sides. The Kim-Putin meeting notably came on the heels of the trilateral Camp David summit between South Korea, the United States and Japan in August. Pointing to Seoul and Washington's pledges this year to expand joint military drills and plan joint responses to nuclear contingencies, Yoon said that the two sides had reaffirmed that any nuclear attack by North Korea will be met with a swift, overwhelming and decisive response that would end the regime. Echoing his words at the East Asia Summit earlier this month, Yoon again stressed that China should play a responsible and constructive role in handling North Korea, as well as addressing other global challenges. He is expected to make a similar call during a speech at the UN General Assembly on Wednesday local time. Yoon said that as South Korea, as a non-permanent member of the Security Council next year, will play a responsible role on pertinent issues, including North Korea's nuclear program and the war in Ukraine. He will also address global gaps in the areas of development, climate response and digital transformation, and lay out South Korea's plan to help resolve such challenges, particularly in tackling the growing digital divide and building new global norms to make digital technology ethical and beneficial for humanity. Yoon will hold a Digital Vision Forum at New York University, expanding on the principles he declared in Paris back in June. Until his 5th and final day in New York City, the South Korean leader will hold at least 30 bilateral meetings on the sidelines in an all-out effort to win support for Busan City's bid to host the 2030 World Expo. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
On behalf of the Assembly,
And over the weekend, top diplomats of the U.S. and China met up in Malta, looking to stabilize the two countries' relations. Their 12-hour-long secret meetup raises the possibility of a summit between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping. Lee Seung-ja has more.
For 12 hours from September 16th to the 17th, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang held talks on the Mediterranean island nation of Malta. According to the White House, the meeting came as the two rival countries look to responsibly maintain their relationship at a time of strained ties. In separate statements published by the White House and the Chinese Foreign Ministry on Sunday, the two held candid, substantive, and constructive talks during multiple meetings over the course of the 2 days. The White House said that the two sides discussed key issues in the U.S.-China bilateral relationship, global and regional security issues, Russia's war against Ukraine, and cross-strait issues, among other topics. Beijing, meanwhile, noted that the two sides conducted candid, substantive, and constructive strategic communication, focusing on stabilizing and improving Sino-U.S. relations. Meanwhile, a senior Biden administration official said that there are early signs that Washington and Beijing could resume military communications that have been severed over the past few years. However, Chinese officials did not comment on the issue of military-to-military communications resuming. However, the Chinese Foreign Ministry did say that both parties agreed to maintain high-level exchanges and hold bilateral consultations on Asia-Pacific affairs, maritime affairs, and foreign policy. The latest meeting comes after a number of high-ranking U.S. officials visited Beijing in recent months for talks. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and Biden's climate envoy John Kerry all visited China this year to thaw its bilateral relations. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jongun wrapped up his 6-day Russia visit on Sunday and is returning home. Despite concerns and warnings from the international community, the leaders of Pyongyang and Moscow showed off their special bond. For more, we're joined by Bruce Klinger this morning. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said the North and Russia have entered a new era in their relations and are enjoying what he called a golden age. How would you evaluate Kim Jong-un's Russia trip? I mean, how was it meaningful for the two leaders?
I think for the two leaders, it was successful. We've seen that the two countries have resumed stronger relations really since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Both countries are outcasts, are isolated, heavily isolated and sanctioned due to their own actions. But in this way, they're trying to gain military cooperation between both nations. There was no announcement from either leader, but the White House previously said that North Korea may provide significant amounts of artillery, which would enable Russia to continue its operations in Ukraine, and return may gain military technology from Russia for military reconnaissance satellites or nuclear-powered submarines. But we don't know any details yet of whether any of that took place.
Right. Now, not only was there a summit with Vladimir Putin, Kim also inspected Russia's nuclear-capable bombers, missiles, and a warship over the weekend. Does the tour mean he's not too happy about North Korea's naval forces? I mean, maybe it's not strong enough yet?
We've seen a renewed focus by Kim Jong-un himself on North Korea's naval capabilities in recent months. Just in the past month, he's given a number of speeches. North Korea has unveiled a new missile submarine, which perhaps can fire nuclear-tipped missiles. He's also talked about nuclear weapons for the naval forces, and we've seen cruise missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missiles that have been test-fired recently. So there is a new emphasis on North Korea's naval forces to be another part of the nuclear forces. But he would likely want more military technology from Russia to continue to augment and refine North Korea's capabilities. And his visit was really a buffet line of military-related facilities in Russia that he may want to gain technology from.
Right, you mentioned the details of those military cooperation are yet to be disclosed, but how much of Russia's space technology will North Korea actually get? I mean, will the North get it immediately?
Well, North Korea would likely want additional Russian technology. Pyongyang has had two failed launches, or attempted launches, of its military reconnaissance satellite. That said, the missile programs, the satellite reconnaissance satellites so far have been largely indigenous, though gaining some technology from various sources. But if he were to be able to get Russian technology, that might enable him to make great leaps and bounds in the greater capabilities for not only a military reconnaissance satellite, but also his missiles.
Right. The trip also comes timely considering that the North is aiming to attempt to launch its spy satellite for the third time next month.
Exactly. So we'll see how that goes. In the past, under his father, Kim Jong-il, North Korea would usually have very long time after a failed launch in order to make sure that they got the next one right. And there were reports that scientists were punished. Under Kim Jong-un, he's much more willing to accept failure as the cost of success, in that there will be a second or third or more attempted launches even after a failure. In 2017, we saw 3 failed launches of an intermediate range ballistic missile, and then followed by 3 more successful launches that year.
Right. And in an interview over the weekend, South Korean leader President Yoon Sukhyun, he said the military cooperation between North Korea and Moscow is illegal and unjust, and the international community will unite more tightly against it. Now, does that mean there'll be more sanctions on the regime in Moscow? I mean, what other options other than sanctions are there?
Well, under existing UN resolutions, the military cooperation in the sense of transfer of military technology or weapons is prohibited, both going from North Korea to the outside world and then in reverse. So any kind of military technology or weapons or equipment provided one way or the other, including the artillery ammunition from North Korea to Russia, is a violation of numerous resolutions. That said, Moscow and Beijing would likely block any additional new resolutions or new sanctions. However, there's a lot of authority under existing UN resolutions as well as international and U.S. law that could enable additional sanctions against individual entities of not only North Korea and Russia, but Chinese banks and businesses that have been facilitating North Korea's prohibited nuclear and missile program. So perhaps not additional authorities, but additional actions under existing authorities.
Sure. In the meantime, China appears to be not too enthusiastic about this Kim Jongun, Vladimir Putin summit, considering they haven't really reported much on that summit, right? Now, but with Hangzhou Asian Games taking place soon, how likely is it that Kim Jong-un will visit China and sit down for talks with Xi Jinping?
Well, it's really a matter of when. I think it's very likely that there will be another North Korea-China summit, but perhaps not in the immediate future. North Korea has a history of playing China and Russia, or previously the Soviet Union, off against each other. Now he seems to be focusing more on Russia to see what benefits he can get, military, economic, et cetera, from Russia. So I think the emphasis for a while will be with Russia, but eventually Kim will come back to China because China is responsible for over 90% of North Korea's foreign trade. So I think in the near term, the emphasis will be on Russia, but then it will have to come back to China for economic reasons.
Sure. Let's see how that trio manages their partnership. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You have a good evening.
Well, thank you for having me.
The Gaya tumuli of Korea's ancient Gaya Confederacy have become South Korea's 16th site inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The addition came in recognition of the site's archaeological significance. Shin Se-byuk has more.
The Kayatumuli, a cluster of 7 tombs from Korea's ancient Gaya Confederacy, was inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage Site list on Sunday. The decision was made during the 45th session of the World Heritage Committee held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Gaya was a confederation that prospered between the 1st and 6th centuries in the southern and central regions of the Korean peninsula. The inscription comes after a decade-long effort which began when the burial mounds were put on a tentative list in 2013. In May this year, the tumuli were recommended for inclusion on the UNESCO World Heritage List by the International Council on Monuments and Sites, an advisory organization under UNESCO. The Cultural Heritage Administration said the latest edition recognizes the tumuli's outstanding universal value.
The Gaya tumuli show the diversity of ancient civilizations in East Asia. They serve as evidence that neighboring countries could maintain horizontal relationships while maintaining autonomy.
The cone-shaped burial mounds, which extend across the hills of Goryeo in Gyeongsangnam Province, include burial accessories and items showing the Confederation's network of trade as well as shared cultural commonalities. With the latest inscription, Korea now has 16 sites on the UNESCO World Heritage List. The Cultural Heritage Administration plans to pursue a UNESCO World Heritage listing for landmarks such as the capital fortification of Hanyang in Seoul. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
BTS member Suga is set to begin his mandatory military service this week, becoming the third member of the group to do so. According to his agency Big Hit Music on Sunday, the 30-year-old star will fulfill his military duty by doing an alternative service beginning Friday. Now, this comes as Suga was ruled unfit for regular combat duty. In Korea, all able-bodied men must serve in the military. However, those with health issues may be assigned to alternative services, including working at a municipal government office. While his health issue has not been disclosed, it's believed that it's related to shoulder surgery he had in 2020. South Korea and countries in Africa have come a long way in tightening their economic partnerships and are looking to strengthen those relationships even further. Our business correspondent Yang spoke with the president of the African Development Bank.
The passion and commitment for economic ties between South Korea and Africa couldn't be halted by the COVID-19 pandemic. That's what President Akinwumi Adesina of the African Development Bank said during an interview at the Korea-Africa Economic Cooperation Ministerial Conference, a biennial event held for the first time in 5 years due to the pandemic.
The Korean government has subsequently supported us in the replenishment of the African Development Fund, which is a concessional financing window of the bank, and the Korean government provided us $108 million, and that is the highest they've ever given since they joined the fund in 1980.
Feed Africa being a part of the bank's agenda known as the High Fives, President Adesina has been emphasizing Africa's food self-sufficiency. Africa has 65% of the world's remaining uncultivated arable land that will have the potential to feed up to 9 billion people worldwide by 2050, meaning what Africa does with agriculture will determine the future of food around the globe. South Korea is supporting this by sharing its rice production technology with its counterparts in Africa.
And I'm very excited about the Korean Rice Belt initiative, in which the Korean government is providing high-yielding varieties, agronomic practices, and other types of technical support to 8 African countries to be able to produce rice. Africa imports about $6 billion of rice every year, so if we're able to produce a lot of rice, we can conserve foreign exchange and also make sure that we create a lot of jobs in rural areas.
The bank has also been putting efforts behind green growth for Africa. Along with adaptation to climate change and renewable energy generation, metals used in electric mobility have become crucial to go green, as Africa has vast amounts of the minerals and ores that are needed for batteries.
And I want to see companies from Korea investing in Africa, in lithium-ion battery manufacturing in Africa, but also making electric vehicles in Africa. And in fact, I'm going to tell you one thing that's quite exciting is that to manufacture lithium-ion batteries, precursor batteries in Africa is 3 times cheaper than manufacturing it in China or in the United States. So if there's a place to be, that's it.
Areas including energy transition and agriculture are expected to see further development at the next South Korea-Africa Summit.
Korea-Africa Energy Investment Framework, which is actually a co-financing facility that is providing $600 million of co-financing with the African Development Bank, will go a long way in helping us towards that. So I'm hoping that for the Korea-Africa Summit next year, we'll be able to show to the heads of state how we are scaling up together renewable energy in Africa.
To mobilize more resources for Africa's development, he is also hoping to work with South Korea regarding the reallocation of the special drawing rights to Africa that the IMF implemented worldwide in 2021. 신하영, 아리랑 뉴스, 부산.
Good morning, I'm Matthew Ashley, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in eastern Libya, where the death toll from last week's devastating floods in Derna has now reached at least 11,300 people. That's according to the United Nations on Sunday, which added that another 10,000 are still missing. The global organization cited figures from the Libyan Red Crescent, but the Red Crescent has disputed the numbers, saying it was shocked to have been mentioned in the latest report. Now, local officials have instead put the number of dead closer to 3,000. But the death toll is expected to continue rising as rescuers comb through debris. Now, the floods were triggered by heavy rains that caused 2 dams to collapse near the city of Derna. A quarter of the city is thought to have been wiped out. The military juntas controlling Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso have signed a joint security pact that promises mutual aid in case of any rebellion or external aggression. The 3 West Sahel nations formed the pact on Saturday in the Burkina Faso capital of Bamako. It establishes what is called the Alliance of Sahel States, which will see the partners lend economic aid and even military assistance if any one of them comes under attack. It comes as the neighbors continue to battle jihadism linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The signatories are also facing outside pressure over the toppling of their governments. All 3 countries have had coups since 2020, the most recent being Niger in July. In the Brazilian Amazon, 14 people have been killed in a plane crash. The crash occurred on Saturday in Barcelos province. The small private passenger aircraft had taken off from Manaus and was trying to land in Barcelos town amid rainy conditions. According to reports, 12 of those killed were passengers and 2 were crew members. All were Brazilian. The plane's operator, Manaus Aerotaxi, said that both aircraft and crew had met all safety requirements. An investigation into the cause of the crash has been launched. And finally, Oktoberfest officially started in Germany over the weekend. The 188th edition of the world's biggest beer festival began in Munich with the traditional opening of the first beer keg. This year, the festival is expected to draw in over 6 million visitors to the Bavarian capital over its 18-day period. And they're likely to drink a total of more than 2 million gallons of beer. The Bavarian Festival opens on the 2nd to last Saturday in September and wraps up on the first Sunday of October. This year, it will end on October 3rd, when Germany also marks its reunification day. The festival got its start in 1810 to celebrate the marriage of the Crown Prince of Bavaria.
Good morning. The September heat wave continues with afternoon temperatures going 2 to 4 degrees higher than seasonal norms again. Daegu and nearby areas will see highs going up above 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Skies will remain sunny with a chance of passing rain. East of Gyeongsang-Bukdo province could see up to 60 millimeters of sudden showers. The rest of the country could see 5 to 40 millimeters of sudden rain. Mountainous regions could see rain turning into hail. And for now, the capital is forecast to stay dry under sunny skies all day today. It's a refreshing start to the day. Then highs in most parts will be similar to higher than Sunday. And especially those of you in Gyeongsang-do and surrounding regions, you will notice much warmer daytime highs this afternoon. Nationwide rain is in the forecast on Wednesday, which will drag down the morning temperatures to below 20 degrees in the capital. But afternoon highs will stay above norms for most of this week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Tuesday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? I'm live!
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고.
좋아요.
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future. 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Welcome.
24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day. We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's September 18th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Park Ki-hoon.
Good morning.
Good morning, and Kim Jongun.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Germany's popular Oktoberfest, known as the world's biggest beer festival, kicked off on Saturday in Munich. The city expects around 6 million people from around the world to visit from now until October 3rd, when the 188th Oktoberfest is scheduled to wrap up. And bringing the news feed back to South Korea, the Korea Institute of Public Finance has found that households with kindergartners have spent 38% more on private education over the past 5 years. Last year, the average amount spent on a child at kindergarten was around $168 a month. Researchers found that high distrust towards society, specifically government policies, politicians, and public servants, was the main reason parents invested more in their child's private education. And earlier this morning, unionized rail workers in Korea wrapped up their 5-day-long strike. From last Thursday, the Korea Railway Workers Union demanded improved working conditions and expanded KTX bullet train services to Suga Station in southern Seoul. If a middle ground had not been met yet between the union and officials, the strike was expected to go on for a few extra days, but officials have long tried to avoid this scenario given that the strike already cost a lot of money and inconvenience to the public. And speaking of inconvenience, as of 3 p.m. Sunday, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport found out only that 71% of the country's available trains were running as usual. And what caused the most inconvenience was the lack of KTX and subway trains in Seoul. Only 67.5% of KTX trains were operating as of 3 p.m. Sunday, as well as 76% of trains on the Seoul Metro. And considering the fact that it was a Sunday and many people were moving about, many civilians expressed their discomfort. Now, here in the studio, Ki-hoon, were you one of the many who felt discomfort or inconvenience from the strike?
For me, luckily, I didn't have to take the subway or the KTX during the strike. But surprisingly, my auntie visiting from all the way from LA actually experienced discomfort. Yeah, because she was planning to visit her friend in Gangwon-do province, and she was trying to book a ticket, but only found out that there were no tickets available. So she had to cancel all her plans and stay in Seoul. And I actually found out through her about the strike. But you know, but for me, I think fingers crossed that hopefully the second strike doesn't happen.
Right. A lot of people were worried that we might see an extension of the strike going on from today, and this would come just before Chuseok. And a lot of people were worried that if the strike continues, not a lot of people would be able to use these trains to go and meet their relatives, right?
Exactly. And next week is the beginning of a very long holiday, Thanksgiving in Korea, called Chuseok. So there were concerns about the strike actually hindering most of the country's populations moving around transportation to their hometowns and things like that. There are concerns about a second general strike as well. Although the first one has been terminated today as of 9 a.m., we might see a second one, which the union has said it might go on indefinitely.
Right.
So as of today, 5 p.m., the KTX train services will resume normally, and normal or cargo trains from 6 p.m., as well as Seoul Metropolitan trains from 9 p.m. today. So we'll see a bit of so we'll see a bit of sort of the trains getting back to normal scheduling, but we'll have to see towards the end of the week to see if there's any concerns for the Chuseok holidays.
Right, hopefully a middle ground is met and negotiations go on as planned. And that was our news feed for this Monday. Let's switch gears to our main discussion now. Yesterday was Gambling Expulsion Day in Korea, and we're going to discuss a growing concern in South Korea, which is the issue of gambling addiction. Take a look at the screen to find out more. Gambling addiction. This is a pressing issue that's becoming more common among young Koreans, especially since it's happening online, which makes it easier for the thumb generation to start. Online gambling, though, is of course prohibited by Korean law. Nonetheless, the Korea Problem Gambling Agency found that more than 7,000 students were treated at hospitals for gambling addiction from the years 2017 to 2021. A separate survey on around 18,000 students found that around 3 out of 10 of them tried gambling games on the internet. Around half of those were at risk of becoming addicted. Yesterday marked the 15th Gambling Expulsion Day in Korea, and in 2018, the Korea Problem Gambling Agency designated September 17th as a day to raise awareness about the dangers of gambling addiction. And before we dig deeper into our discussion topic, why don't we first find out what types of gambling are happening in Korea? Also, let's look into specifically what types of gambling are illegal. Xiang, walk us through.
Yes, I mean, according to the National Gambling Control Commission Act, Article 2, Paragraph 1, legal gambling and bettings in Korea is limited to lotteries, what we call lotto system, ran by the Korea Lottery Commission, horse racing, cycling, boat racing, as well as sports betting through the official Korea Sports Promotion Foundation website. There is also a casino that's available for domestic population called Gangwon-land, which is located, as Kyun will say later, 150 kilometers or so from Seoul. But that's also very limited. That's the only casino in Korea that allows domestic resident citizens to go. Rest of the casinos are for tourists and expats only, hotel casinos, etc.
Right.
And anything else, including online gambling, social gambling, and technically casino gambling abroad is illegal for Koreans. However, there is a level of leniency, especially for leisurely gambling. The Korean legal system do allow, up to a certain extent, if you go abroad and if you do sort of non-harmful amounts of gambling in foreign casinos, well, let's say you go to Las Vegas, maybe you bet $100, $200, you lose it, you win some money, they'll be lenient towards that. But if you are a regular offender, or if you've been caught red-handed at the spot, if you've been first offender, you'll be fined up to $10,000 US. But if you've been regularly caught regular offender, up to 5 years in prison or $30,000 US as a fine.
I see. So though it's legal in certain circumstances, gambling has always posed a problem to society, mainly because people who get hooked onto it can fall into addiction. Also, it's often done illegally among young people who could resort to extreme measures to restock their betting money. Tell us a bit more about this societal issue, Ki-hoon.
You know, gambling has become a societal issue among many MZers because they grew up in the digital age, meaning that they had easier and quicker access to online gambling. So like right now, as long as you have a smartphone and are over the legal age, you can start gambling, online gambling almost immediately. And according to last year's report from the Incheon Problem Gambling Agency, almost 70% of people who requested gambling counseling were in their 20s and 30s, highlighting the concern of young people becoming more easily addicted. And when it comes to gambling, many people, like including us, think of the casino and card games, but online gambling sites offer like a diverse range to arouse the curiosity of users. So if you take a look at the screen, top 5 types of gambling in South Korea reported last year was casino at 5th, stocks, ladder game, cards, and sports bet as number 1, topping at 37%. And just by looking at sports betting, there are tons of different types of bets you can actually make for each sport. So it kind of feels like having a million menus in just one restaurant for the wrong reason.
That's a very good analogy. And you mentioned, Ki-hoon, that a lot of people are in their 20s and 30s. They're reaching out for counseling when it comes to addiction. Then why do you guys think that, especially people from our generation, can easily get addicted to gambling?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest contribution to the increase of youth gambling in Korea especially is the advancement of web space, online spaces, and easy connection to all sorts of global websites as well as domestic operators of these illegal gambling. And as Kyun mentioned, they do operate a variety of different games and different systems where you can be easily hooked onto, and some of them are too easy. You can just click a few and then it's very simple, straightforward, and it does seem like you do get your money if you win the odds. And technically, the sports bet, they do it illegally because the winnings are often more competitive than the official routes. Right, so previously, I mean, if you're a young person and if you want to gamble, before the internet days, you'd have to either gather a circle of gamblers, set up a place and play some cards or something. But nowadays, it's not physical anymore. You don't have to actually go find a casino, illegal casino or anything. You can just go online at your own time, log on. If you have an online banking account, you can start straight away, which is part of the problem. And this makes it much harder for the authorities as well to penalize and track down some of these young offenders, as well as the normal average gamblers in South Korea.
Right. And as you mentioned, I think because of the open internet, not only can people easily access it, but they can easily get money, put in more money. Kyung, would you like to add on why our generation seems to be so hooked onto gambling?
I think the rise in housing costs, inflation, polarization in wealth, all attribute to many youngsters going all in, wishing to hit the jackpot through online gambling and even cryptocurrency. So, but little do they realize chances of winning a lifetime's worth of money in one go is very slim. But once they do, it's too little too late. So, and also another factor is how gambling sites advertise so openly and design their websites. And it's very fancy, and it almost seems like an online game.
Right. So, it almost sounds like you've been to a couple of those websites.
I've seen many banners. It just pops up everywhere.
Especially on the web space.
Exactly,
if you just go read an article, it's at the bottom, news sites and stuff like that as well.
You can earn money. And as youngsters, because they're less educated and they don't know too much about the whole concept of gambling, they will just click it. And once you realize it, you've already logged on.
You've already logged on?
Yeah, and you're just playing a few games. And if you win some, you have that kind of feeling, I can win more.
I know.
That's when you start losing. So I think it's really, youngsters need to be a bit more careful in terms of
But it's really
gambling.
hard for them to be careful because we're seeing more and more in classrooms that these teenagers are giving information as to where they can gamble. And as you mentioned, with living costs being so high, it's so hard for them to actually earn money at work and then try to buy a house. So they're looking for that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
And you know what I find interesting is that the statistics included stocks as well.
Exactly.
Because I mean, technically stock is a part of gambling. Investment is technically gambling. You're not entirely sure whether you get your money back, whether it will actually prove to be a successful investment. So technically, the whole finance system is also
It is, but then at least there's regulations, whereas for online gambling, it's so hard to control and regulate, which is why it's causing problems like addiction. And before we move on, we also asked our viewers if they've ever tried gambling and whether they would agree that one can easily become addicted to it. Take a look at the screen to find out. Hal said, sometimes the stock market feels that way. I played cards with my friends for a while to pass the time. The risks and rewards were limited to pocket money. That's a point made by Xiong as well. And You Can Change Elias said, I've been to a casino twice with some friends. In fact, I didn't even bet more than what I initially proposed as the cost of the experience. Chris Garcia said, yes, I gambled in Busan at Paradise Casino. I played roulette. Now, here in the studio, what about you guys? Did you guys try any friendly or legal gambling? Or what about your friends?
Did you say illegal?
Legal.
Illegal. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Because, I've always liked the game of cards, and I like board games like chess as well. And actually, one of my really good friends back in London, he became a pro poker player.
Oh, wow.
And now he lives in LA. He's doing all sorts of tournaments, big games. And so we've played quite a number of friendly games all the time. And if you're in the same quite competitive level with your friends and stuff, it's actually a great time to spend your time. Playing some poker, trying to read each other's faces, if he's got the cards or not. It's actually quite harmless fun, you would say. And
if it's done legally, of course.
Exactly. If it's a good culture and it's friendly, no feelings harmed or anything, that's fine.
Well, what about you, Q? And I want to ask if you did it, because I know you're a foreigner in Korea.
Yeah, because like just what Xiong mentioned before, all foreigners in South Korea are legally allowed to enter any kind of casinos, in hotels, and even like big casinos, including Gangwon-land, which is open to Korean citizens as well. So I did go to casinos like every now and then until I realized, if I kept going, I'll lose all my money and become really addicted. So luckily I was able to restrain myself from continuing to go. So I actually stopped going to the casino a few years back, long time ago. So I haven't been to one in many years.
Wow, that takes a lot of willpower.
Yeah. Clean now.
But that leads me to my last question for this part of our discussion. Do you think, how should we perceive gambling? Could it be another form of entertainment or something we should never get our hands on in the first place in fear of addiction?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen anyone earn a large amount of money through gambling. And even if they did, I'm sure they would have spent most of it already because easy come, easy go. And for me, like the only source of gambling I would do, if you call it gambling, is when I play sports with people I know. So what we do is we make a small bet where the winner either earns a small, very small amount of money or pays the least out of
Someone pays for lunch or something.
Exactly, something like that. So, and it's all agreed upon. So there's no harsh feelings involved at the end. And I think if you play it right, it will be a good source of motivation and, of course, entertainment.
Right. It could be entertainment, but I think one issue that we need to keep highlighting is that people can easily fall into addiction. And that's why we're going to include a psychological expert in our talks to find out what the psychological process is behind people who start gambling, fall into addiction. We'll include her right after this. Let's include a psychology expert in our talks to explain to us the process of becoming addicted to gambling. It's Oh Ji-hee, who's working as the director at Peniel Counseling Center here in Korea. Welcome, Ji-hee.
Well, hi.
All right, Director Oh, could you tell us, how can you know that you're addicted to something, and what's the psychological process like?
Well, addiction is very severe sometimes, and chronic and recurrent kind of disease that needs professional help. And there are some signs and symptoms that you can notice, like loss of control is one, and cravings. You cannot easily feel strong and intense urge to do the actions. And the tolerance is to have the same effect. You need more and more substance or certain behavior. And then withdrawal symptoms, which is that you try to cut down or stop using substance or certain behavior, that you have physical and emotional withdrawal symptoms, such as craving and irritability, anxiety and depression. And you notice that negative consequences of like problems at work, problems at school, problems with finance. If you have any of those symptoms that indicate that you might be addicted. And there are some stages of getting addicted. First, you get experimentation stage, that you first try and have fun, but later on you develop to the regular use stage. That in that stage you become more and do things more regular basis. But then even then you start experiencing cravings and withdrawal symptoms on that stage. And in the dependent stage, that you develop physical and psychological dependence on the substance or the behavior, that you notice that you cannot function regularly without it. And you start to experience negative impact on your life.
Exactly.
And the final stage is the addiction stage, that you cannot differentiate something real from unreal. So you do destructive things such as stealing or lying or do things that is quite harmful.
Yes, Director. So you've given a very thorough description of how addiction stages work, how someone might be hooked onto certain, even substances you've mentioned, as well as gambling. And I think the feeling and the rush you get when you sometimes win is the cause at the root of the gambling addictions as well. But would you say there's specific types of personalities that are more susceptible to addiction, especially in the maybe younger generation, in your opinion?
For the younger generation, person who is more impulsive sometimes, or person who seek sensational seekers. They try to find something new, something exciting, and do not think about consequences of their actions. And because of that, they fall into some addictive kind of actions easily. And also people with depression, people with anxiety problems, they try to avoid their negative emotions. And so that's why they try to contact something that makes feel better. Also, people with low self-esteem, they try to avoid certain situations and try to feel better about themselves. And that's why they try to contact something more fun and exciting. Or people from family of addiction. They are more easily exposed.
They could be susceptible to it,
yes.
yeah.
Professor O.
Let's go to the last question, Professor O, due to time.
Okay, very briefly, how is the government trying to help people overcome addiction, specifically gambling addiction?
For the gambling addiction, they do important roles of regulating the gambling policy, but also protect the people. So most importantly, they offer 24-hour hotline for the people, which is 1336, and is open 24 hours. And they contact you to the regional office or the regional center, and that whenever you call, they provide individual service, individual counseling, group counseling, or programs that is proper for you, and that is free.
So that you
also,
can get so you can get this help you need straight away 24/7. You mean, I think that's quite important.
I think that's a very
for the addicts as well.
Exactly. I think that's a very important way we can end off today's interview. Thank you so much, Director O. It was a pleasure hearing from you today.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so before I end off the discussion, I'd like to ask you guys one final question. What do you guys think is the best way to tackle the gambling problem in Korea?
I think before asking the government to crack down on these illegal gambling sites, it's great how the Professor O mentioned, you know, there's a hotline open 24/7 for people who think they're addicted. But I think as adults, like parents especially, should feel obligated to teach their own children about the effects of obsessive gambling, and even teachers as well. They can also contribute by educating the students on addiction and avoiding it, and to who and how they can reach out for help when in need.
Because as she mentioned throughout the interview, I think based on your environment, you can easily fall prone into addiction and gambling. So it really depends on who you have around you and knowing that you have helping options out there.
Yeah, and I think it's time that it's an interesting case, gambling, the topic gambling in South Korea, because as we've mentioned, the Korean government also runs operates the bookmakers for horse racing, cycling, all sorts of bets, as well as Gangwon Casino, is it Gangwon Casino. So they also, in a sense, promote a culture of gambling to a certain extent that's moderated by the government. And I think it's time the government actually decides democratically whether it's actually fine to keep on continuing these routes when the youngsters, especially with the digital age, that expose a lot of stimulants, they're used to it from a young age, looking at contents and things like that. They might be looking for new stimulants in their lives. So I think it's time they really decide whether it should be legal in certain sense or heavily regulate so that we don't fall into addiction.
Given that people are doing it illegally, might as well regulate it so they can do it in legal grounds. All right, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Park Gi-hoon.
Thank you for having me.
And Kim Seong.
My pleasure.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.
Welcome